Good morning. Thank you for the very unexpected pleasure of being able to address you here today. As Imogen had explained, I'm not Kelly Tohill, who unfortunately is sick. I was actually really looking forward to her presentation on the media. I've heard Kelly speak before, but she's unable to be here. So what I'm going to do, I've been asked to do, is to walk you through kind of the year-long process that ISENS went through in looking at the election and understanding the discussions that would be happening in our community and how we could put resources together to support a positive messaging around immigration in our community. Before I start, I do want to say a huge shout out to the communication manager at ISENS who is here, Josh, who's done a marvelous job over the past 24 hours to be able to put some resources together for me to be able to move forward on this. I just press this one here. Perfect. This is building, looking forward to where we're moving when we looked about a year ago or over a year ago in August 2018 about the beginning discussions that are happening around the election and how we wanted to not be involved in negative messaging. And we kind of looked at three kind of milestones of being able to build a strategy within ISENS in terms of how we would do that. We looked at building partnerships as one key component, using a modular approach to development of resources so we could be somewhat nimble in how we could use those as it evolved over the year, and then also being very specific about looking at some specific election education materials. We recognized that there would be strength in approach through using innovative tools, tactics, and partnerships, and frankly, this was kind of a testing for us. This is not something that we've done before. It was kind of, although we've been involved in doing education work for a long time, it was a new kind of stepping out for us in this area. So building partnerships. In August 2018, in particular, discussions happening with many of the national conventions, and immigration was kind of coming to the fore and anticipating that they were going to be hearing negative messaging about this. Really wanted to reach out, so I touched base with the Halifax Chamber of Commerce, the United Way, and the Halifax Partnership, and kind of had a meeting that we kind of said, how can we look at the next year of really not being involved in always reacting to negative messaging, but really putting a forward-facing positive message in the community in Halifax and in the province around immigration. So we identified key events that would be happening. The National Metropolis was happening in March of 2019. An Atlantic Immigration Summit was happening in that time. And using our regular kind of communication channels to begin to just tell positive stories, so building that kind of base for support. So we kind of had the buy-in. There was no, negative discussion within that group. Yes, okay, how can we use our existing channels and also look at some very unique things that were happening in our province to be able to move that message forward. We really, for me, it was a big kind of situation of not wanting to, how I describe, always having to start from the back foot in terms of media relationships. So there's some poll came out that was negative. ISENS, can you provide some comment? We've heard this comments from this particular party. ISENS, what's your comment? So trying to really say, internally within ISENS, we want to be on our front foot. We want to be creating situations, creating opportunities, and really leveraging things because we don't have a lot of time. There's a lot of other things on our plate as a settlement agency, but to really maximize opportunities and to use those as the best possible ways, and particularly building our partnerships. So that was one of the kind of key moving forward over the year that we, parts of the strategy that we put together. In terms of looking at some of our resources, we really also wanted to, we came up with kind of three things. This second generation booklet, which is available online. I have a couple copies here if anyone's interested. But it was really looking at the long-term impact of what immigration is. It's a legacy piece, and really understanding the stories of people who are second generation and them being able to, in their own story, tell about what their experience was and what they were doing here in our province now. We also developed an Immigration 101 toolkit and, as I said, specific election resource material. So we focused on what we thought would be key themes and thought would be issues that we raised during the election and tried to anticipate take to develop those resources, and also to make sure they are very much in plain English and accessible to ordinary citizens in our province in terms of understanding and really using the story narrative. What is the story? What are the values that are being talked about, and how important that is in our community and the growth around that. We did use, as I mentioned before, a modular approach to try to make sure that these tools are adaptable in many different situations, and use media monitoring software so we can begin to identify some of the themes that are emerging and taking place. So, addressing the negative rhetoric, we were one of the communities that received one of those billboards in terms of no mass immigration. It was very challenging for us when that happened. It was a Friday afternoon when we first got, media kind of pinging, oh, there's, this billboard's gone up, and began to see this kind of response across the city, in particular in Halifax, about what that meant. But because we had these partnerships already built, there were already kind of messages, phone calls between a couple of us saying, okay, the billboard's gone up, what's going to be our messaging, what can be our strategy. So over that weekend, there were kind of some comments and things happening about, well, what are we going to do? And we kind of made a commitment. We were going to have an op-ed in the paper the next week. We were going to start doing some positive messaging on social media. But I must say it was very, very hard to hold the line, because we took a position, we're not going to react to that billboard. We're not going to buy into the negative messaging. We had no response to that billboard. And that was really hard, because there was a lot of social media that weekend. I was getting messages from staff saying, what's our response? What's our response? And, we're kind of standing back. We're kind of holding our line. We're not going to respond to that. The community is taking care of that. There was a lot of response from individuals in the community about, this is terrible. That doesn't represent me. I don't want that. And we just did not plug into that conversation. But I got to tell you, it was hard to make that decision and kind of hold that position over those, 72 hours. Then, as a result of the further conversations, in particular with the Chamber of Commerce, said, you know what? I think we're going to approach the billboard company and see what we can do in terms of a positive messaging. So ourselves, there were a couple other organizations, in particular Edgenova, which is a consortium of university supporting international students in universities, got together and developed this campaign of messages, but it was not led by ISNS. It was actually led by the Halifax Chamber of Commerce that did all the groundwork in terms of negotiating, getting it together, checking the messages, calling meetings, whatever. So that partnership work that's happened over the past year, and actually further back, really paid off in terms of being able to have a very effective messaging campaign that countered this negative message using the same media, but not buying into the messaging of what they were saying. We certainly we very much appreciated the work of our partner, the Canadian Council of Refugees, and their Better Together campaign. That really helped us kind of draw and ground our messaging in terms of what we wanted to have. And as I said, we also then moved into a lot of other media work, interviews based on the Billboard campaign, and also in the positive aspects of immigration. So this is one example of the billboard that went up. Immigration, it's our strength and story. And I must say that I heard from a lot of people that I would not normally hear from, and saying things like, when I walked down the street again and I saw your billboard, I thought, thank you. Thank you, because that other billboard was not me and was not my community. And having that up just on my walk to work changed my day in terms of who I felt I was in the community. I recognize, particularly, I think in the discussion this morning, certainly with Kamal, raising the issues of, the racialized community, that the story is not necessarily always a positive story. And I think we need to do work on unpacking that story. But to look at generally over our history, it has been our strength and it has been our story. And it's been a positive one in terms of our community. So reminding ourselves of that in our local context. So specifically, and the other thing that we also did was that we worked with the United Nations Human Rights Commission, or Council for Refugees, sorry, on the Cities with Refugees movement, and also were able to finally last week get the motion passed through Halifax Regional Council in terms of supporting that city standing with refugees, because again, we felt it was very important that we felt part of the narrative was just focusing on economic, immigrants and not on refugees. And again, having the city reaffirm publicly of standing with refugees was very important for us. And so we worked hard to get that motion through council, which was again just affirmed last week. So what we did, again, is saying that we were pulling together different tools for our campaign. We had one-pagers on key themes. We developed a toolkit. We had question postcards, which I'll show you one in a minute, did media interviews, but also our language school did a lot of work around having mock elections so that our clients were understanding what is the process that was happening in terms of the elections. They set up their own polling booths, had their polling clerks, their information officers, they actually had a booth where people went and voted, set it up, did a tally, get the results. So really worked hard within our organization to educate our clients around that, but that also got a lot of media attention as well. What's the process? How are people learning about elections in Canada? And then the comments about how people felt it was such an important exercise for them to be able to participate in the vote. Okay, 5 minutes, yes. That was very important, and I think one of the learnings is that, again, I would not want to give a false impression. We have a fabulous communication team that does awesome work, but it is a chaotic process in the midst of everything else within a settlement agency, all of the other work you're doing to kind of start up a campaign, move it forward, stop a campaign, come back again. I remember in August sort of waking up one night thinking, oh my God, the election's coming, in 2 months. And we said it last year we were going to do all this education work, and where are we? And can we get it all together? So I just want to say to the settlement agencies in this room that it's not necessarily a perfect process. It's not necessarily a coherent one, but doing what you can with the very best tools you can is important, and that it does make a difference. So this is just an example. These are the sort of the sides of the postcards. So this is what they looked like. We did 4 of them. On one side, you'll see that we had the standard back, what to ask your candidate, 2 kind of key questions. And then on the other side, we would have 4 different themes. This one in particular is that immigrants grow our communities. So just some kind of facts in a very accessible manner. And what we felt was important, and this was tailored to our volunteers, our staff, and our clients. So if someone came knocking on your door, what do I say? I want to say something, but I'm not sure what I can say. So in a very accessible manner, here's some things to consider. This is what you can kind of start your conversation with your candidate and help move that forward. So the key next steps and key learnings. Certainly proactive partnerships early on are really important, and building that sense of trust, who can do what, supporting one another so there's a larger buy-in around immigration. Creating a kind of common knowledge base and consistent monitoring of the rhetoric and messages so that we can then begin to develop themes in a proactive manner. We really are focusing on developing, we have done this for quite a while, but really emphasizing the approach to storytelling. So again, using the theme of immigration, it's our strength and story, really focusing, because that's one of the things as a settlement agency we have are the stories. So how can we move those stories of people that we engage with on a daily basis out into the wider community? We also are looking at building the concept that, apart from, Indigenous people, we all have an immigration story. So helping people unpack and connect back to that immigration story, as painful as it may be in some cases, but really understanding what that looks like. It doesn't have to be perfect, just be as good as you can be. We had lots of internal kind of tension. Should we do this? Should we do that? Are those the right questions? No, they're not. They're not reflective of the broader community. And in the end, we can only do the best we can, and we do it in a way that we hope is reflective of our community, but we're also evaluating that and learning from that. The other key thing was that and I think particularly through the billboards, is that once the other billboards came up, was the realization how important it is to speak and address that. It's important for newcomers in our community to see that. It's important for the community at large. It's important for our partners and those who publicly can't communicate. So like government officials, people that work in our government coming and saying, thank you for the billboards, you know, we can't do anything to say that, but that's really appreciative, but also for our staff. And I think that's one of the really important things, is that staff see us as well as being a leader and able to reflect their experience because of all of the work that they do on a daily basis and the stories that they carry on the part of our clients as well. I would also want to say really importantly how important it is to incubate and support creative, thoughtful staff in communications who push the boundaries of who we can be as communicators. We need to step up our game as a sector, and we need to do that. And again, I'd say that's even, you know, within ISINs, we're struggling, right? Because we have only so many dollars, so many things to do. Where do we put our resources? But understanding that we really need to be challenged and to begin to push some boundaries around this, which are very important. So in terms of the role of SBOs in trying to work around this issue, is telling the story is very, very important. You know, conveying those values and feelings are very important. Making the information accessible is key. Finding your comfort zone about how you communicate, but then being committed to pushing those boundaries. Stepping outside of your comfort zone around that as well. And then invest in communication. Beg, borrow, support one another. We're more than happy to share our resources with others and also to learn from others in terms of what is happening with your communication strategies. So seeing each other as a resource. I'd just like to point out as I finally close that there is, you know, a communication workshop happening at 11 o'clock, which is being facilitated by Louisa Taylor, one of our very strong partners from Refugee 613. As well as our communication manager from ISINs. So if people are interested in following up in more details around that and about the importance of how they see communication evolving and supporting our work, would certainly encourage you to consider that workshop. Thank you.